The morning sun barely touched the Rocky Mountains of Afghanistan as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison checked his gear one final time. His team of 6 Navy SEALs had been preparing for this mission for weeks. Intelligence reports showed a high-value target, hiding in a remote village nestled between steep cliffs and narrow valleys. Morrison looked at his men, each one a battle-tested warrior who had survived countless operations in hostile territory. Sergeant First Class Tony Rodriguez adjusted his rifle scope, while Petty Officer Mike Chen double-checked the communication equipment. The team had worked together for 3 years, and they moved like a single unit. "Listen up," Morrison said quietly, gathering his team around a dusty map spread on the ground. "Our target is Khalil Hassan, a bomb maker responsible for attacks on 3 coalition bases. Local sources confirm he's holed up in this compound." He pointed to a cluster of mud brick buildings marked on the map. The village of Kalar Kahar sat in a narrow valley, surrounded by towering mountains on 3 sides. Only one road led in and out, making it both a perfect hiding spot and a potential trap. Morrison knew the risks, but Hassan had been planning something big. They couldn't wait any longer. As the team prepared to move out, none of them noticed the figure watching from a distant hilltop. Through powerful binoculars, a woman in military fatigues observed their every move. Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez had been tracking the same target for months, working alone as part of a classified joint operation between Special Forces units. Elena had earned her reputation as one of the military's most skilled marksmen during her previous deployments. Her steady hand and calm demeanor under pressure had saved countless lives. But today she was supposed to be in an overwatch position, providing intelligence and backup support only if things went wrong. The SEALs loaded into their armored vehicles just as the first call to prayer echoed across the valley. Morrison knew they had to reach the village before full daylight exposed their approach. The narrow road wound through rocky terrain, with steep drops on one side and cliff faces on the other. Rodriguez, riding in the lead vehicle, scanned the hillsides through his scope. Something felt wrong. The usual signs of life were missing. No shepherds with their flocks, no children playing near the village outskirts, no smoke rising from morning cooking fires. "Sir, it's too quiet down there," he radioed to Morrison. Elena watched the convoy through her scope from her concealed position on the mountainside. She had arrived at her observation post before dawn, and she had seen things the SEALs couldn't see from the road. Armed men had been moving through the rocks above the village since first light, taking positions that would give them clear shots at the main road. She grabbed her radio to warn the SEALs, but realized they were operating on a different frequency. The joint operation had been planned hastily, and communication protocols hadn't been properly coordinated between units. Elena made a split-second decision that would change everything. The SEAL convoy was now less than a mile from the village when Morrison noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt that seemed out of place. Military vehicles had been here recently, but intelligence had reported no government forces in the area. His instincts, honed by years of combat experience, told him they were walking into something dangerous. As the vehicles rounded a sharp bend in the road, the village of Kalar Kahar came into full view. The compound they were targeting sat at the far end, its high walls and watchtowers clearly visible. But Morrison noticed something that made his blood run cold. The entire area was too organized, too prepared. This wasn't just a hideout. It was a carefully planned killing ground. Elena had counted at least 12 armed fighters positioned in the rocks above the road, with more likely hidden from view. She could see rocket-propelled grenade launchers and heavy machine guns being moved into position. The SEALs were about to drive straight into a perfectly orchestrated ambush, and she was the only one who could see it coming. The convoy slowed as it approached the village outskirts. Morrison ordered his men to be ready for anything, but he still believed they had the element of surprise. In the distance, Elena raised her rifle and steadied her breathing. She knew that in the next few minutes the lives of 6 brave warriors would depend entirely on her skill and courage. The first explosion shattered the morning silence like thunder splitting the sky. Morrison's lead vehicle lurched sideways as an improvised explosive device detonated beneath the road, sending chunks of asphalt and metal flying through the air. The blast was so powerful that it flipped the armored truck onto its side, trapping Rodriguez and 2 other SEALs inside. Before the dust had settled, Machine gun fire erupted from multiple positions in the surrounding hills. Bullets pinged off the remaining vehicles like deadly rain, forcing the SEALs to abandon their convoy and seek cover behind the overturned truck. Morrison grabbed his radio and tried to call for backup, but the mountains blocked their signal. "We're pinned down," Chen shouted over the deafening gunfire. Blood streamed from a cut on his forehead where flying debris had struck him. "They've got us surrounded!" Elena watched the ambush unfold through her rifle scope, her heart pounding as she saw the SEALs fighting for their lives below. She could identify at least 8 enemy fighters firing from concealed positions, with more moving to flank the trapped Americans. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. From her elevated position, she had a clear view of the battlefield that the SEALs couldn't see from ground level. A group of insurgents was creeping through a dried riverbed, trying to get behind the Americans for a killing shot. Elena knew she had to act, even though her orders were to remain hidden and observe only. Morrison pulled Rodriguez from the wreckage of the overturned vehicle. The sergeant's left leg twisted at an unnatural angle. "Can you move?" Morrison asked urgently. "I can fight," Rodriguez replied through gritted teeth, clutching his rifle despite the obvious pain. "But walking's gonna be a problem, sir." The enemy fire intensified, with rocket-propelled grenades now joining the assault. One exploded just meters away, showering the SEALs with rocks and dirt. Morrison realized they were trapped in a carefully planned kill zone with no way out. The insurgents had chosen their position perfectly. The Americans couldn't advance, couldn't retreat, and couldn't call for help. Elena made her decision. She adjusted her rifle, a precision weapon capable of hitting targets at extreme range, and focused on the insurgent leader she had identified directing the attack from a rocky outcrop. The shot would be over 800 meters in mountainous terrain with swirling winds, one of the most difficult shots possible. She controlled her breathing, feeling her heartbeat slow as she entered the focused state that had made her legendary among her fellow snipers. The first shot had to count because once she fired, every enemy fighter would know her position. The SEAL team was running low on ammunition when they heard the sharp crack of a high-powered rifle from somewhere in the mountains above. One of the enemy machine gunners suddenly slumped forward, his weapon falling silent. Morrison looked around in confusion. Where had that shot come from? Elena had already moved to her second target, a fighter with a rocket launcher who was preparing to finish off the trapped Americans. She squeezed the trigger again and the man dropped before he could fire. The remaining insurgents began looking around nervously, realizing they were being picked off by an unseen sniper. "Somebody's up there helping us," Chen observed, pointing toward the mountainside where he had seen the muzzle flash. But who? Morrison didn't care who it was, he was just grateful for the assistance. With 2 of the enemy shooters eliminated, his team had breathing room to regroup and plan their next move. But they were still outnumbered and trapped. With an injured teammate who couldn't walk, Elena continued her deadly work, methodically eliminating the insurgents who posed the greatest threat to the SEALs below. Each shot required precise calculation. She had to account for wind speed, elevation, and the movement of her targets. Missing would mean revealing her position to the remaining fighters. The insurgent leader, realizing his ambush was falling apart, began shouting orders to his remaining men. He had planned this attack for weeks, using inside information to lure the American Special Forces into his trap, but he hadn't counted on the mysterious sniper who was systematically destroying his carefully positioned fighters. Elena could see through her scope that the insurgents were beginning to panic. Several had abandoned their positions and were trying to escape through the rocky terrain. But the leader was still directing the attack, and he had reinforcements moving up from the village below. Morrison noticed the change in enemy fire patterns and seized the opportunity. "On my mark, we move to that ridge," he told his team, pointing to a defensive position about 50 meters away. "Rodriguez, you stay here and provide covering fire. We'll come back for you." "No way, sir," Rodriguez protested. "I'm not getting left behind." Before Morrison could respond, another insurgent fighter fell to Elena's precise marksmanship. The enemy's coordinated attack was crumbling under the pressure of her long-range shots, giving the SEALs their first real chance to fight back since the ambush began. But Elena knew her ammunition was limited, and she could see more insurgents approaching from multiple directions. The battle was far from over, and the most dangerous phase was just beginning. Elena's rifle scope revealed a chilling sight. More insurgents were pouring out of the village buildings like ants from a disturbed nest. She counted at least 20 additional fighters, some carrying heavy weapons and others moving with the disciplined coordination of trained soldiers. This wasn't just a local ambush. It was a major operation designed to eliminate an entire American Special Forces team. Through her earpiece, she could hear radio chatter from the insurgent communications she had been monitoring for weeks. They were calling this Operation Eagle Trap, a carefully planned mission to capture or kill high-value American targets. The SEALs below had walked into something much bigger than anyone had realized. Morrison helped Rodriguez to his feet, supporting the injured sergeant's weight as they prepared to move. Chen, Williams, cover R6. Peterson, you take point, he ordered. The team moved with practiced precision despite the chaos around them, each man knowing his role without needing detailed instructions. Elena shifted her position slightly to get a better angle on the approaching reinforcements. Through her scope, she could see the insurgent leader, a tall man with a distinctive scar across his cheek, positioning his fighters for a final assault. She recognized him from intelligence photos as Abdul Rahman, a former Afghan army officer who had joined the insurgency after the American withdrawal. The sound of her rifle echoed across the valley as she eliminated another threat, this time a sniper who had been drawing a bead on Morrison's team from a concealed position. Elena's shot was so precise that the other insurgents couldn't immediately locate where it had come from, buying the SEALs precious seconds. Move, 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 Morrison shouted as his team bounded between rocky outcrops, using military tactics they had drilled countless times. Each man covered his teammates as they advanced, creating overlapping fields of fire that kept the enemy from getting close. But Rodriguez was slowing them down. Despite his determination to keep up, his injured leg couldn't support his full weight, and he was leaving a blood trail in the dust. Morrison knew they needed to find better cover soon, or they would all be caught in the open when the insurgent reinforcements arrived. Elena watched through her scope as the SEALs struggled toward a defensive position near a cluster of large boulders. She could see that they wouldn't make it in time. A group of insurgents with automatic weapons was moving to cut them off. Without hesitation, she began engaging multiple targets in rapid succession. Her first shot dropped the lead insurgent just as he was raising his rifle toward the Americans. The second shot eliminated a fighter who was trying to flank the SEALs from the left. Elena's marksmanship was so accurate that each bullet found its target despite the extreme range and difficult conditions. The insurgents below began to realize they were dealing with an exceptional sniper. Some started firing wildly at the mountainside where they thought she might be hiding, but Elena had chosen her position carefully. The rocky outcrop provided excellent concealment and multiple escape routes if needed. Morrison's team finally reached the boulder field, taking up defensive positions that allowed them to control the surrounding area. Set up interlocking fields of fire, Morrison commanded. Rodriguez, you're our heavy gunner. Chen and Williams, watch our flanks. From her vantage point, Elena could see the full tactical situation. The SEALs had improved their position significantly, but they were still outnumbered 4-1. The insurgent reinforcements were taking up positions that would allow them to attack from multiple directions. Simultaneously, she noticed something else, troubling. Several of the insurgents were carrying American-made weapons and equipment. Some had body armor that looked suspiciously similar to what coalition forces used. This suggested they had inside help or had captured significant military supplies. Elena's radio crackled to life with an encrypted message from her command center, hundreds of miles away. Shadow 7, what is your status? Shadow 7 is engaged, she replied quietly, not wanting to reveal her presence to anyone who might be listening. American forces under heavy attack, providing support. The radio was silent for a moment before her commander's voice returned. Shadow 7, you are not authorized to engage. Maintain surveillance only. Elena looked through her scope at the SEALs below, watching as they fought desperately against overwhelming odds. Rodriguez was bleeding heavily now, and their ammunition had to be running low. She thought about the oath she had taken to protect her fellow soldiers, regardless of which unit they served in. Copy that, Control, she said into the radio. Then she switched it off. The insurgent leader, Rahman, had grown frustrated with his losses. He could see his carefully planned ambush falling apart because of the unknown sniper. He began shouting orders in Pashto, organizing his remaining fighters for a coordinated assault that would overwhelm the Americans through sheer numbers. Elena counted her remaining ammunition, 12 rounds left in her current magazine, with 2 spare magazines in her pack. Each shot would have to count if she was going to help the SEALs survive long enough for rescue to arrive. She had no idea that rescue wasn't coming. The mission had been so classified that no backup plans existed. Through her scope, she watched as Rahman raised his hand, preparing to signal the final attack. Elena centered her crosshairs on the insurgent leader and took a deep breath. This shot would be the most important of her career, and possibly her life. The crack of Elena's rifle split the air like lightning, and Abdul Rahman collapsed instantly, his hand still raised to signal the attack that would never come. The insurgent leader's death sent shockwaves through his fighters, who suddenly found themselves without coordination or clear orders. Some continued firing while others hesitated, unsure of what to do next. Morrison saw the effect immediately. "Their leader's down," he shouted to his team. "Press the attack while they're confused." The SEALs seized the initiative, their disciplined fire cutting through the disorganized insurgents like a blade. Chen's rifle found target after target, while Williams provided suppressing fire that kept the enemy from regrouping. Even Rodriguez, propped against a boulder with his injured leg, continued to engage threats with deadly accuracy. Elena shifted her scope to identify the next highest-ranking insurgent, a bearded man who was trying to rally the scattered fighters. Through her earpiece monitoring device, she could hear him shouting orders in broken English mixed with Pashto, attempting to reorganize the attack. She eliminated him with a single shot before he could restore order to the chaos. But the victory was temporary. Elena spotted movement in the village below that made her heart sink. Vehicles were approaching, military trucks filled with fresh fighters. The insurgents had called for reinforcements, and now the SEALs would face even worse odds than before. "Control, this is Shadow 7. Elena whispered into her radio after switching it back on. "I count multiple vehicles approaching the engagement area with estimated 40 additional hostiles." The response was immediate and harsh. "Shadow 7, you are ordered to withdraw immediately. Your position is compromised." Elena watched through her scope as the trucks drew closer to the battle zone. The SEALs below had no idea what was coming, and their ammunition had to be nearly exhausted after the prolonged firefight. She made a decision that would end her military career but save 6 lives. Negative control. "I'm staying with the friendlies." The radio went silent. Morrison noticed the sudden quiet from the insurgent positions and used the opportunity to check his team's status. Rodriguez was pale from blood loss but still alert and fighting. Chen had a minor shrapnel wound on his arm but was operational. Williams and Peterson were uninjured but running low on ammunition. "We need to move," Morrison decided. "Find a better position before they regroup." Elena watched the SEAL team prepare to move and realized they were heading toward higher ground that would actually put them in more danger. From her vantage point, she could see that the approaching trucks were taking a route that would cut off that escape path. The SEALs were about to walk into another trap. She grabbed her emergency flare gun and fired a red signal flare in the direction she wanted them to avoid. The bright red streak arced across the sky, clearly visible to everyone in the valley below. Morrison looked up at the signal, understanding immediately that someone was trying to warn them. "Change of plan," Morrison announced. "We go left toward that dry riverbed." The decision saved their lives. Moments later, the trucks Elena had spotted arrived at the position the SEALs would have occupied, disgorging fresh fighters who immediately began setting up heavy weapons. If the Americans had continued on their original path, they would have walked straight into a killing zone. Elena knew her position was now completely compromised. The flare had given away her general location to every insurgent in the valley. She began packing her equipment, preparing to move to a new position before the enemy could organize a search for her. But as she prepared to move, her scope caught sight of something that changed everything. Among the newly arrived insurgents, she spotted 2 men in different uniforms. Not local fighters, but what appeared to be foreign advisors or trainers. One was speaking into a sophisticated radio system, far more advanced than anything the local insurgents should have possessed. This wasn't just a local ambush anymore. Elena realized she was looking at evidence of a larger operation, possibly involving foreign military support for the insurgency. The implications were staggering. If foreign military personnel were directly supporting attacks on American forces, It could change the entire strategic situation. She quickly photographed the foreign advisors through her rifle scope, using the camera attachment that was standard equipment for reconnaissance snipers. The photos would be crucial intelligence, but only if she survived to deliver them. The SEALs had reached the relative safety of the dry riverbed, where the banks provided good cover from most directions. But Elena could see that the insurgents were already moving to surround their new position. The Americans had bought themselves time, but they were still trapped and outnumbered. Rodriguez's condition was worsening. The blood loss from his leg wound was becoming critical, and Morrison knew his teammate needed medical attention soon. "Can you hold your position?" Morrison asked. "Until the job's done, sir," Rodriguez replied weakly, but his hands were shaking as he reloaded his weapon. Elena had moved to a new shooting position, but the angles were more difficult now. The insurgents had learned from their earlier losses and were using better cover, making her shots more challenging. She could still help the SEALs, but each shot required more time to line up perfectly. Through her scope, she watched as the foreign advisors directed the insurgent forces with professional military precision. They were organizing a systematic assault that would overwhelm the Americans through coordinated fire and movement. Elena realized that this was no longer just about saving 6 Navy SEALs. She was witnessing something that could impact national security. The foreign advisors had transformed the chaotic insurgent attack into a methodical military operation. Elena watched through her scope as they positioned heavy machine guns at calculated intervals, creating overlapping fields of fire that would trap the SEALs in a deadly crossfire. These weren't amateur fighters anymore. They were facing professional military tactics. Morrison sensed the change immediately. The enemy fire became more disciplined, more coordinated. "Something's different," he told his team. "They're fighting like soldiers now, not insurgents." Elena knew she had to disrupt the advisors' control over the battlefield. Through her scope, she identified one of the foreign officers, a tall man with short-cropped hair who was clearly directing the assault. The shot would be extremely difficult, over 900 meters with crosswinds, but it was necessary. She steadied her breathing and squeezed the trigger. The bullet found its target and the foreign advisor collapsed. Immediately, the coordinated attack began to falter, as the insurgents lost their professional guidance. But Elena's shot had revealed her new position to the remaining advisor, who began directing fighters toward her location on the mountainside. She could see at least a dozen insurgents climbing through the rocks below her position, armed with assault rifles and rocket-propelled grenades. "Shadow 7 has multiple hostiles approaching position," Elena whispered into her radio, knowing that her commanders were listening even though they had ordered her to withdraw. The response was predictable. "Shadow 7, extract immediately." "That is a direct order." Elena looked through her scope at the SEALs below. Rodriguez was barely conscious now, supported by Chen as they tried to move to better cover. Morrison was down to his sidearm, having expended his rifle ammunition. They wouldn't last another coordinated assault. Unable to comply, Elena responded. "Friendlies require immediate support." She began packing her rifle and equipment, preparing to move to her third position of the day. But the insurgents climbing toward her were closer than expected. She could hear their voices echoing off the rocky walls as they searched for her hiding spot. Elena made a split-second decision that would save her life. Instead of trying to outrun the insurgents up the mountain, she began moving down toward the valley floor. It was the last thing they would expect, a sniper abandoning the high ground to get closer to the enemy. Morrison heard footsteps approaching their position and raised his pistol. To his amazement, a woman in military fatigues emerged from behind a large boulder, carrying a precision rifle and wearing the insignia of an Army Staff Sergeant. "Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez," she announced quietly. "I'm the one who's been providing overwatch." "Thank God you're here," Morrison replied. "We've been wondering who our guardian angel was." Elena quickly assessed the situation. Rodriguez needed immediate medical attention. They were nearly out of ammunition and the insurgents would regroup soon. "We need to get to higher ground," she said. "I know a defensible position about half a click north." "Rodriguez can barely walk," Chen pointed out. "How are we going to move him that far?" Elena looked at the injured SEAL and made a quick decision. From her pack, she pulled out a combat stretcher, lightweight but strong enough to carry a wounded soldier. "We carry him," she said simply. The remaining foreign advisor had reorganized the insurgents and was preparing another assault, when he noticed that the sniper fire had stopped. Through binoculars, he spotted the American soldiers beginning to move along the valley floor. He immediately began directing his fighters to intercept them. Elena took point as the combined team began their movement toward higher ground. Morrison and Williams carried Rodriguez on the stretcher, while Chen and Peterson provided rear security. The going was slow and dangerous, with open ground offering little concealment. "Contact front," Elena called out as she spotted insurgents moving to block their path. Without hesitation, she dropped to a prone position and began engaging targets with her rifle. At close range, her marksmanship was devastating. Each shot eliminated a threat before the insurgents could effectively return fire. The team moved through the contact in a series of bounded rushes, with Elena providing covering fire while the others advanced with Rodriguez. It was a textbook small unit movement, executed under the worst possible conditions, but the insurgents had numerical superiority and local knowledge of the terrain. They began appearing on the flanks and in positions the Americans hadn't expected. Elena realized they were being herded into another ambush just as carefully planned as the first one. "We're being channeled," she warned Morrison. "They're trying to force us into a kill zone." Morrison looked around at the terrain and realized she was right. The path they were following led to a narrow canyon with steep walls on both sides, perfect for an ambush. But changing direction would mean crossing open ground, where they would be completely exposed. Elena studied the situation through her rifle scope and spotted the insurgents moving into position along the canyon rim. The remaining foreign advisor was with them, directing the placement of heavy weapons that would turn the canyon into a death trap. "I can take out their command element," Elena said, "but I'll need to get closer. Can you hold here for 5 minutes?" Morrison looked at his exhausted team and their wounded teammate. 5 minutes might as well be 5 hours in their current situation, but he trusted the skill of the woman who had already saved their lives multiple times. "Do it," he said. "We'll hold." Elena began moving toward the canyon rim, using every bit of cover the rocky terrain provided. She had 6 rounds left in her rifle and 1 spare magazine. It would have to be enough to break the ambush and give the SEALs a chance to escape. Elena moved through the rocky terrain like a shadow, using every crack and crevice for concealment as she approached the canyon rim. The remaining foreign advisor had positioned his forces perfectly, machine gun nests at both ends of the canyon, with riflemen spread along the high ground. It was a textbook ambush that would annihilate anyone caught in the killing zone below. Through her scope, Elena could see the advisor checking his watch and speaking into his radio. He was coordinating the timing of the attack, waiting for the Americans to enter the canyon before springing his trap. She estimated she had less than 3 minutes before Morrison's team would be forced to move into the open. The climb to effective shooting position was treacherous, with loose rocks that could give away her position with a single misstep. Elena had trained for this kind of stalking mission countless times, but never under such desperate circumstances. The lives of 6 American soldiers depended on her ability to reach the right spot undetected. Below in the valley, Morrison was running out of options. Rodriguez had lost consciousness from blood loss, and the insurgents were closing in from multiple directions. "We have to move," he told his team.
"Staying here means we all die." Chen looked at the narrow canyon ahead and shook his head.
"That's a death trap, sir. They're waiting for us in there." "I know," Morrison replied grimly, "but it's the only way out." Elena finally reached a position where she could see the entire ambush setup. The foreign advisor was approximately 400 meters away, surrounded by insurgent fighters. The machine gun positions were even more distant, but within range of her precision rifle. She would have to eliminate multiple targets in rapid succession before they could react. She centered her crosshairs on the foreign advisor first. He was the key to the entire operation. Without his professional guidance, the insurgents would likely scatter, rather than maintain their coordinated positions. The shot required perfect timing and execution. Elena controlled her breathing and squeezed the trigger. The foreign advisor dropped instantly, his radio clattering down the rocky slope. Immediately, confusion spread through the insurgent positions as fighters looked around trying to understand what had happened. Without pausing, Elena shifted to the nearest machine gun nest. The gunner was frantically trying to locate her position when her second shot silenced his weapon permanently. She quickly moved to the second machine gun position, knowing that every second of confusion was precious. Her third shot eliminated the second machine gunner. But now the remaining insurgents had figured out her general location. Bullets began striking the rocks around her position, forcing her to keep moving between shots. Morrison heard the distinctive crack of the sniper rifle and knew Elena was making her move. "That's our signal," he announced. "Move fast and stay low." The SEAL team began their desperate dash through the canyon, carrying Rodriguez between them while Elena provided covering fire from above. Her shots were becoming more difficult as the insurgents learned to use better cover, but her marksmanship remained deadly accurate. Elena could see more insurgents approaching her position from below, climbing through the rocks with determination born of desperation. Her ammunition was nearly exhausted, 3 rounds left in her current magazine and 1 spare mag remaining. Each shot had to eliminate a threat or she would be overwhelmed. Through her scope, she spotted a group of insurgents setting up a mortar in the valley below. If they got that weapon operational, they could rain high explosive shells down on the escaping SEALs with devastating effect. Elena knew she had to stop them, but the range was extreme and the angle was difficult. She steadied her rifle against a rock outcrop and calculated the shot. Wind speed, elevation, target movement, everything had to be perfect. Elena squeezed the trigger and watched as the mortar team scattered when their weapon was destroyed by her precisely placed bullet. The SEALs were halfway through the canyon when Elena's radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. "Shadow 7, this is Overlord. Air support is inbound to your position." Elena couldn't believe what she was hearing. After hours of being ordered to withdraw, command was finally sending help. She looked at her watch. How long could the SEALs hold out until the aircraft arrived? "ETA on air support," she asked into her radio. 12 minutes, came the reply. Elena looked through her scope at Morrison's team, still exposed in the canyon while insurgents moved to flank their position. 12 minutes might as well be 12 hours. The SEALs needed immediate help and she was the only one who could provide it. She counted her remaining ammunition one more time. 2 rounds in the rifle, 1 full magazine in reserve. Against at least 15 insurgents who were now actively hunting her position, it wasn't much. But it would have to be enough. Elena spotted the insurgent who seemed to be taking charge after the foreign advisor's death, a local fighter who was trying to coordinate the scattered forces. He was shouting orders and pointing toward both her position and the canyon where the SEALs were trapped. She centered her crosshairs on him and fired. The insurgent leader collapsed, creating even more confusion among his followers. But Elena's shot had revealed her exact position to the remaining fighters, who immediately began converging on her rocky perch. Elena grabbed her rifle and spare magazine, knowing she had to move fast. The insurgents were only minutes away from overrunning her position. But as she prepared to move, she spotted something through her scope that changed everything. A child, no more than 10 years old, was running across the battlefield toward the village. In the chaos of the firefight, a local family had tried to flee their home, and their young son had become separated and confused. He was running directly toward the heaviest concentration of insurgent fighters, completely unaware of the danger he was in. Elena watched in horror as the young boy stumbled through the battlefield, his small figure silhouetted against the smoke and dust of the ongoing firefight. Several insurgents raised their weapons toward the child, perhaps thinking he was carrying a message or explosive device. In the fog of war, innocent civilians often became casualties through tragic misunderstandings. Without hesitation, Elena abandoned her defensive position and began running down the mountainside toward the child. Her movement immediately drew fire from multiple insurgent positions, but she ignored the bullets whining past her ears. A child's life was at stake, and no military objective was worth more than that. Morrison saw Elena's desperate descent and realized what was happening. "Cover the sergeant," he shouted to his team. Despite their own desperate situation, the SEALs began laying down suppressive fire to protect Elena's movement toward the terrified child. Elena reached the boy just as several insurgents converged on their position. She scooped him up with one arm while raising her rifle with the other, firing her last 2 rounds to drive back the immediate threats. The child clung to her frantically, crying in Pashto words she couldn't understand but whose meaning was universal. Pure terror. Now Elena was trapped in the open with an empty rifle. A frightened child and insurgents closing in from all directions, she pulled out her sidearm and began moving toward a cluster of rocks that might provide minimal cover. The child was slowing her down, but she refused to abandon him to save herself. Morrison made a command decision that defined his leadership. All units converge on the sergeant's position. We're not leaving anyone behind. The SEALs abandoned their defensive positions and began a coordinated assault toward Elena's location. Rodriguez, despite his injuries, provided covering fire from Chen's shoulder as the team moved with the precision that had made them legendary. Elena reached the rocky cover just as her pistol ammunition ran out. She had the child behind the largest boulder and prepared to fight with her combat knife if necessary. But as the insurgents closed in, the distinctive sound of rotor blades began echoing through the valley. 2 Apache attack helicopters appeared over the canyon rim like avenging angels. Their 30mm cannons opened fire with devastating effect, sending the insurgents scrambling for cover. The precision strikes eliminated the remaining heavy weapons positions within seconds. Behind the Apaches came a Chinook transport helicopter, which landed in the valley despite the ongoing firefight. A squad of Army Rangers poured out, establishing a defensive perimeter while medics rushed toward the casualties. Elena carried the child toward the helicopter, where Morrison's team was already being evacuated. Rodriguez was loaded onto a stretcher and rushed into the aircraft, where military medics began emergency treatment for his blood loss and leg injury. Outstanding work, Sergeant, Morrison said as Elena reached the helicopter. You saved all our lives today. Elena looked at the child in her arms who had stopped crying and was staring in wonder at the massive helicopter. Just doing my job, sir, she replied. The Apache helicopters continued to provide cover as the Chinook lifted off, carrying the rescued SEALs, Elena, and the young Afghan boy to safety. As they climbed above the battlefield, Elena could see the insurgent forces scattering into the mountains, their carefully planned ambush completely destroyed. Later investigation would reveal that Elena's photographs of the foreign advisors provided crucial intelligence about international support for insurgent operations. Her actions had not only saved 6 Navy SEALs, but had also uncovered a significant threat to regional security. Rodriguez recovered fully from his injuries and returned to active duty 6 months later. The young Afghan boy was reunited with his family, who had been hiding in their village during the battle. The entire SEAL team received commendations for their actions under fire. Elena faced a disciplinary hearing for disobeying direct orders to withdraw from the engagement. However, when the full story became known, including her rescue of the child and the intelligence value of her photographs, she was instead awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action. The citation read, Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez distinguished herself by conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an armed enemy. Her precision marksmanship, tactical expertise, and selfless courage under fire directly resulted in the survival of 6 American service members and 1 civilian. Her actions exemplify the highest traditions of military service. Years later, Morrison would often tell the story of the woman Sharpshooter who appeared like a guardian angel when his team needed her most. Elena had proven that in the crucible of combat, training, courage, and precision could overcome overwhelming odds. The battle at Kalar Kahar became a case study at military academies, demonstrating how individual initiative and exceptional marksmanship could change the outcome of an entire engagement. Elena's actions showed that sometimes, disobeying orders was the most honorable thing a soldier could do.